One of my clients was arrested and went to jail, and we couldn't find him the next day. I was astonished, but as it turns out, jails lose people all the time. These are fellow Americans that are supposed to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, but unfortunately the system failed them and they were lost in jail. So I want to go over with you what happened to my client, how we got him out of jail, and how you can make sure you protect yourself or your loved one from being a victim of being lost in the system. One day, the wife of my client called me crying. Her husband had just been arrested for spanking his 11-year-old daughter. He had now been arrested and charged with the crime of injury to a child bodily injury, a third-degree felony. This is a crime that's punishable by up to 10 years in prison and up to a $10,000 fine. When the police arrived, the father explained how he had just disciplined his child because she was trying to sneak out of the house in order to hang out with a 16-year-old boy she should have never been hanging out with. Unfortunately, there was no real investigation that was done. Instead, the police just decided to arrest the father for spanking his child, and now he was going into the system. My client went to the city jail. We then sprang into action and called the city jail to arrange bail. The problem is we found out the city jail said they had already transferred him to the county jail. When we called Tarrant County, we found out that they said they didn't even know who we were talking about, and he wasn't even there. The city jail doesn't have him. The county jail doesn't have my client. Where is my client? While we were working on finding my client, I did some research, and come to find out, this is something that happens very frequently. People get lost in jail. In fact, the Dallas Observer ran a story in 2021 explaining that some people end up getting lost in jail for months at a time. One man was lost in Harris County Jail in Houston, Texas for months. In fact, the 42-year-old National Guard veteran had been charged with the crime of robbery, but his public defender had not come to see him for so long, they actually reset his case 7 times, and he ended up sitting in jail for 3 years without a trial, and no one took the time to figure out how he was doing. Now think about this, the jail had over 9,000 inmates and the average stay time was 201 days. Jails are clearly designed to be temporary detention facilities, not housing units for long-term stays. This happens in Dallas too. There are accounts in the Dallas County Jail of people being held for up to 6 months at a time. No attorney ever came to see them. They have no idea what the status was on their case, and they still couldn't get out of jail. There are other accounts where there are misdemeanor offenses. They're sitting in jail for 4 months. Now listen, I did not want my client to suffer at all in this situation, but the jail seemed to not be in a rush at all. We made multiple calls, we visited jail administration, we yelled at them, we threatened them. After we badgered them and tried to force the issue through reaching out to a local judge, our client was finally released. While he was in jail, jail administration even mixed up who he was. They came to him trying to give him insulin shots because they believed he was diabetic. If he hadn't become belligerent with them and yelled at them and denied any of this, then this situation could have gotten even worse for him medically because he could have been given insulin shots he didn't need. So now our client was finally out of jail, but he wasn't out of trouble. Now we had to meet with him and prepare his defense and figure out our next move. But during this period of time, we began to learn that most jails are just like this, particularly in Texas, because of the cash bail system. Texas and other states are notorious for this. The way it works is they require non-violent offenders to post cash or surety bonds for low-level offenses in order to get out of jail. Well, what if you're indigent and you can't afford it? Now you could be sitting in jail for years, even though you're supposed to be presumed innocent. And think about this, this puts pressure on innocent people sitting in jail. Now they have a choice of either taking a plea deal to get out of jail, or they continue to sit there and there's no way to avoid the hell of local jail. Most court-appointed attorneys will not even go visit their clients sitting in jail in these situations unless that individual is ready to take a plea deal or work out their case. Perhaps the worst case of this happened with Larry Price, a mentally disturbed man in Fort Smith, Arkansas. He had severe mental health problems and an IQ below 55. He had walked into the police department with his finger pretending it to be a gun, and he was cursing at police officers. The police chose to arrest him for terroristic threat of public servant. I want to remind you, he was no real threat, he had no real weapon, and he was clearly mentally handicapped. His bond was set at $1,000. All he needed was $100 in order to get out of jail. But unfortunately, he was destitute. He couldn't afford to get out, so he sat in jail for over a year, and during that entire time, he was placed in solitary confinement, and his medication was removed. At times weighing 200 or more pounds, at the time Mr. Price died in solitary confinement, he weighed a mere 90 pounds. Towards the end, he had resorted to eating his own feces and drinking his own urine in order to survive. Don't forget, this man had not been convicted of anything. He was presumed innocent, and he had a right to a jury trial. This is happening all over Texas and other states as well. In fact, in 2023, the FBI has launched a federal civil rights investigation against the Harris County Jail for a number of inmates who have died while under their care. And as a result of that, lawsuits are coming. The move from the FBI comes after public outcry for why dozens of people have died while in the jail. According to county records, at least 21 inmates have died in custody at the Harris County Jail just in 2021. Another 28 inmates died in 2022. And finally, there have been at least 4 inmates who have died just in the first quarter of 2023. So how do people get lost in jail? From what I can tell, 3 primary reasons. Number 1, criminal defense attorneys not doing their job. Or if it's a court-appointed attorney, that court-appointed attorney is not really interested in going to see the client until it's time to work out a plea deal. And that can sometimes take months or even years. The cash bail system is set up to punish the poor and the indigent. If you have money and you can afford to bond out of jail, no problem, you get your release. But if you can't afford to bond out of jail, now you're like poor Mr. Price, sitting in jail and sometimes in solitary confinement for up to a year with no trial. And finally, number 3, the overpopulation of county jails. Most counties and states have not fairly allocated the amount of resources that are necessary in order to meet the population demands in local jails. People just don't care about people charged with crimes sitting in jail. Legislatures don't want to spend the money and allocate the resources in order to make sure that the population is adequately served in local and state jails. The other problem is the criminal justice system has failed indigent people because they continue to sit there with no checks and balances to make sure that the jail is treating people humanely and giving them the right to a speedy trial so that they have the opportunity to be able to be heard and released from custody. Fortunately for our client, we were relentless until he was released from jail. Once he was out, we gathered the evidence, we formulated our defense, and he was exonerated from any wrongdoing. But if he wasn't able to afford a good criminal defense attorney, he could have been left sitting in custody, lost in the system, and losing his constitutional rights. If you'd like to know more about how to get out of jail as fast as possible, check out this video where I talk about 5 life-saving tips if you ever get arrested. I'll see you there.